Today, let's talk about India. India, you could say, is quite a unique country. Over the past 20 years, it has rapidly risen with an average GDP growth rate of 6.25%, surpassing countries like South Korea, Canada, Italy, France, and becoming the world's fifth largest economy. Morgan Stanley predicts that within the next 5 years, India will surpass Germany and Japan to become the world's third largest economy. India's two richest individuals take turns at the top, and tech unicorns are popping up one after another. Apple has also announced plans to shift 25% of its iPhone production capacity to India. So, you might say that India is on a remarkable ascent. However, at the same time, it has 10% of its population living in extreme poverty. Many people still practice open defecation, and Mumbai's largest laundry facility relies on manual labor. Corruption is rampant in India. So, what exactly is the situation in India? Is this economy good or bad? Let's cut to the chase and take a closer look at this unique country. India. In fact, before the 18th century, India's economy was quite formidable. The IMF made a rough estimate of the historical contribution of major economies to the global economy, although historical data is not very precise. If we take a glance at the rise of the United States from the 20th century, where it accounted for 40% of the global economy, and China's rapid growth since the early 2000s, India's economy was once on par with China, each contributing about a third to the global economy. So, on one hand, it's true that the Industrial Revolution in Europe led to a significant exponential increase in Western productivity. However, what was more devastating for India was we've all heard of the two major East India companies, the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company, with the latter having a more significant impact. While the Dutch company primarily covered East and Southeast Asia, its influence on India was limited. But the British East India Company gradually transformed from a trading entity into a colonial power in India. While the Industrial Revolution was in full swing in Britain, India became a source of raw materials such as spices and textiles, which were directly exploited by the British. While India was stuck in agriculture, textiles, and lacked industrial and technological development, Britain's per capita GDP was rapidly rising during this period. After World War II, the British left, and India finally gained independence. However, if you look at its GDP, it had plummeted from a global share of 25% during colonial rule to just 2%. Once the British left, Indians realized the need to protect themselves and their economy from the exploitation they had endured for over 2 centuries. They adopted a strict policy of self-reliance and imposed heavy controls on their economy. They also embraced a model of economic planning influenced by the former Soviet Union and were highly cautious about foreign investments. Moreover, they developed a system known as the license Raj, which was crucial. In simple terms, most businesses, regardless to start a business, you had to navigate through dozens of government departments, complete various registrations and approvals, and establish relationships with officials to obtain these licenses. Once you secured a license, it was akin to being inside a safe box. Well, you're in luck because the Indian economy, while slow to develop, took a significant turn in 1991. India was already struggling to make progress, and then it faced another major setback. Its biggest trading partner, the Soviet Union, disintegrated, and around the same time, the Gulf War erupted, causing a sudden surge in oil prices. On one hand, India couldn't sell its goods to its key customers, and on the other hand, the cost of energy imports skyrocketed. This put immense pressure on the Indian government's finances, and it even faced the risk of defaulting on its sovereign debt. In the end, if you wanted to start a business, you had to navigate through numerous government departments, go through various registrations and approvals, and build relationships with officials to obtain these licenses. Once you had that license, it was like being inside a safe box. As a result, India moved towards a market economy. From 1995 to 2008, India's exports grew at an average annual rate of over 13%, ranking third globally, only after China and Vietnam. The overall GDP steadily rose at an average annual rate of 5.5%, making India the world's fifth largest economy. But let me interject here for a moment. Keep in mind that India's economic data might have some discrepancies, so take it with a grain of salt. Now, during India's rise, one industry played a crucial role, and it was very distinctive to India: outsourcing. India became the undisputed king of global outsourcing, accounting for more than half of the world's outsourcing industry. Virtually all major US tech companies, like Google, Amazon, Intel, Apple, IBM, and many others, outsourced part of their operations to India. Now, you might wonder why these big companies chose India for outsourcing. Well, there are 3 main reasons. First, labor costs are incredibly low. For instance, an experienced engineer in India overseeing a team of a dozen people might earn just over $10,000 a year. Compare that to the US, where even the lowest minimum wage in New York is around $30,000 a year. If you were the boss, which option would you choose? Second, India has a vast pool of IT talent. For some reason, Indians highly value STEM education. Many parents believe that the most important goal for their children is to become engineers or programmers. So, in India's education system, STEM education is strong. Lastly, India excels in English proficiency. Since English is widely spoken in India, it became a natural choice for English language outsourcing. So, these three factors made India the go-to destination for outsourcing. Phew, that's quite a journey through India's economic history. If you have more questions or need further translations, feel free to ask. Indeed, CEOs of major tech companies like Google, Microsoft, and even the recently ousted CEO of Twitter are now of Indian descent. What's interesting is that many of them studied in India before making their way to the United States. If you look at Silicon Valley's tech companies today, approximately 1/4 of the workforce is of Indian origin. This demonstrates the strength of India's STEM education. Another significant advantage India enjoys, and one it owes to its colonial history, is the widespread use of English. While only about 10% to 20% of Indians have received a good education in English, that still translates to nearly 300 million people. That's enough to make India the fourth largest English-speaking country in the world. As a result, India has essentially become the world's call center and tech support hub. When you call customer service for overseas shopping websites or airlines, you're likely to hear a thick Indian accent on the other end of the line. With all these factors considered, it's no surprise that India has become a global outsourcing center. In 2019, the total outsourcing revenue reached over $70 billion, and some reports even suggest it's over $100 billion. Either way, it's a substantial figure. Now, looking at India's rapid economic development, it seems like it's just a matter of time before it becomes the third largest global power after the United States and China. But wait, you might ask, with such a large economy, why is India's per capita GDP so much lower than the United States and even China? In 2021, India's per capita GDP was $2,250, while the United States was at around $70,000, less than 1/30th of the US. Of course, if you compare India to the US, it seems like a tough challenge. Even compared to China, India lags behind. If we look at Vietnam, you could say it's somewhat outperforming India. But if we look at neighboring Bangladesh, which used to be ahead but has been overtaken by India in recent years, it's a different story. And if India falls behind, you could even compare it to Myanmar. However, no matter how you look at it, India's massive population is truly enviable for most countries. The key factor is that not only does India have a large population, but its age structure is also very favorable. Compared to China, for example, India has a significantly smaller elderly population and a much larger young population. India's median age is 27.6 years, meaning more than half of its population is under 28. In comparison, China and the United States have a median age of around 38. France is 42, South Korea is 43, and Japan is 48. This demographic dividend should be a huge advantage, right? Oddly enough, India isn't encouraging population growth, in fact, it's actively promoting family planning. Despite having what most countries would dream of, India's large population is somewhat of a burden. They can't generate enough jobs for all these people, so having more mouths to feed without corresponding job opportunities is a challenge. So, despite its large population, India has an issue with underemployment. Even seemingly simple jobs like washing clothes are still done manually because labor costs are so low that it's more affordable than buying washing machines. This illustrates that many people in India are willing to accept low wages because they can't find better employment opportunities. Now, let's delve deeper into the problems at the grassroots level of India's economy. There are roughly three main issues. First, there's the problem of India's economic structure. It's not that there aren't enough job opportunities, there are. But the issue is that there aren't many high-quality, high-productivity jobs available. If you have more questions or need further translation, feel free to ask. India's economic development can be divided into three main sectors: agriculture, industry, and services. During the early years of British colonial rule, agriculture was the dominant sector in India. After gaining independence, the government aimed to promote industrialization. However, it encountered problems due to monopolies, license systems, and a lack of market competition, leading to underdeveloped industries. When economic reforms began, India shifted its focus to the service sector, particularly IT services, which grew rapidly and accounted for 56% of the sector. However, this shift occurred before the industrial sector could fully develop. India's two wealthiest individuals, Ambani and Adani, alternated as Asia's richest for a decade, but their wealth largely comes from monopolies, and their ties with the government are not always transparent. To address the weakness of India's manufacturing industry, the government initiated the Make in India program in 2014, aiming to attract foreign companies to invest in India due to its low labor costs. However, the overall effect has been modest. India's manufacturing sector's contribution to GDP fell from 17% to 14%. India's bureaucracy, permit systems, and corruption are deep-rooted problems that hinder efficiency. Corruption is prevalent, affecting various aspects of life, including education, driving license acquisition, and business operations. Approximately 39 out of 300 Indians who deal with the government reported engaging in bribery in a year, making India's corruption levels among the highest in Asia. India's informal economy is substantial, with around 90% of the workforce employed in non-registered companies, evading labor laws and taxes. This informal economy contributes to inefficiencies and the perpetuation of poverty. In an attempt to combat the informal economy and tax evasion, the Indian government implemented a demonetization policy in 2016, declaring 500 and 1,000 rupee notes invalid. This move disrupted the economy, but it also accelerated the adoption of electronic payment systems. Another significant challenge in India is its deeply ingrained caste system, which divides people into four categories with associated occupations. Even though the caste system is no longer legally upheld, it still influences social interactions and employment opportunities. Only 5% of marriages in India cross caste lines, highlighting the persistence of these cultural divisions. These structural issues have resulted in India's inability to create sufficient employment opportunities for its rapidly growing population, leading to significant income inequality. Despite its high GDP growth rate, India has a substantial portion of its population living in poverty, and addressing this issue remains a major challenge. In conclusion, India has experienced rapid economic growth since its economic reforms in 1991. However, structural problems, including an underdeveloped industrial sector, bureaucratic hurdles, corruption, and the persistence of the caste system, have hindered the country's ability to provide adequate job opportunities and have contributed to income inequality. While India has made progress in poverty reduction, these issues continue to affect the well-being of its population.